And as this journey continues, we arrive at a truth that is both simple and demanding. Authentic relationship requires us to slow down enough to be real. In a culture addicted to speed, productivity, and instant response, slowness can feel like failure. But in relationships, slowness is often wisdom. It is in the pause that we notice what we are feeling. It is in the pause that we choose our words with care. It is in the pause that we decide not to react, but to respond. Authenticity lives in that pause, because when we rush, we default to habits. We repeat patterns. We protect instead of connect. But when we slow down, we become intentional. We ask ourselves, what is actually true for me right now? And then we find the courage to bring that truth into the relationship. This is how authenticity becomes embodied, not just spoken. It shapes tone, not just content. It shapes timing, not just honesty. It shapes presence, not just words. And presence, true presence, is one of the rarest gifts we can offer another human being. To be present is to give someone your attention without agenda, to listen without preparing your defense, to sit with discomfort without escaping it. This kind of presence tells the other person, you matter more than my need to be right, to be efficient, or to be comfortable. And that message builds trust faster than any promise ever could. Trust, once established, becomes the backbone of authentic relationship. It allows truth to land without threat. It allows difference to exist without distance. It allows mistakes to be addressed without fear of abandonment. But trust is fragile when honesty is inconsistent. That is why authenticity must be practiced, even when it feels inconvenient, even when it interrupts harmony, even when it reveals uncertainty, because selective honesty erodes trust faster than open disagreement ever will. People can handle truth. What they struggle with is confusion. Authentic relationships minimize confusion. They replace guessing with clarity, assumptions with conversation, and resentment with understanding. They do not leave people wondering where they stand. They tell them, and telling the truth clearly, kindly, and consistently is an act of respect. Respect says, I will not manipulate you with silence. Respect says, I will not confuse you to protect myself. Respect says, I trust you with reality. When respect becomes mutual, relationships gain dignity. They stop being emotional battlegrounds and start becoming spaces of collaboration. Collaboration in meaning, collaboration in growth, collaboration in navigating life together. This is where authentic relationships reach their deeper purpose, not just to make us feel good, but to help us become better. Better listeners, better partners, better humans. And this betterment is not about self-improvement for its own sake. It is about alignment, about living in a way that does not fracture us internally, about closing the gap between who we are and how we relate, because that gap, when left unaddressed, is exhausting. It drains energy, it breeds anxiety, it creates loneliness, even in connection. Authenticity closes that gap. When you say what you mean, when you ask for what you need, when you honor what you feel, you stop leaking energy. You stop overthinking. You stop rehearsing conversations that never happen. And that mental and emotional freedom is not small. It is life-giving. So if this message feels demanding, remember this: authenticity gives back more than it asks. It gives back peace. It gives back clarity. It gives back depth. It gives back relationships that feel solid rather than performative, nourishing rather than draining. And as you continue to choose authenticity, you will notice something subtle but powerful. The right people lean in. The wrong dynamics fall away. And what remains feels simpler, truer, and more alive. That is not loss. That is alignment. Alignment between your inner world and your outer connections. Alignment between your values and your relationships. Alignment between the life you live and the truth you carry. And alignment is what allows us to move through life with steadiness, even when circumstances are uncertain. So let this continuation be a grounding, not a pressure. Let it remind you that authentic relationship is not about doing everything, right? It is about doing what is real, about staying honest even when it is awkward, about staying present even when it is hard. Because every time you choose authenticity, you choose a deeper kind of strength, the strength to be seen, to be known, and to remain connected without losing yourself. And that strength will carry you forward into relationships that do not just accompany your life, but actively shape it for the better. And there is still more ahead. And now, as we stand at this continuing edge of reflection, let us name the quiet resistance that still lives within many of us. Because even when we understand authenticity, even when we agree with it, something in us still hesitates. That hesitation is not weakness. It is memory. It remembers moments when honesty was met with dismissal, when vulnerability was punished, when being real cost us connection. And so we learn to protect ourselves, we learn to adapt, we learn to survive. But survival is not the same as living. Authentic relationship asks us to unlearn some of those protective habits, not all at once, not recklessly, but intentionally. It asks us to distinguish between wisdom and fear. Wisdom sets boundaries. Fear builds walls. Wisdom says, not yet. Fear says, never again. And the future of our relationships depends on which voice we follow. Authenticity does not mean opening every door to every person. It means opening the right doors to the right people at the right pace. It means letting trust grow organically through consistency rather than urgency. It means honoring your own safety while refusing to let past wounds dictate permanent isolation. This balance between openness and discernment is where authentic relationships become sustainable. Because sustainability matters, relationships that burn bright but lack truth burn out quickly. Relationships that last are those that can carry reality without collapsing under it. They make room for fatigue, for doubt, for complexity. They do not require constant strength. They allow for rest, and rest in relationship is revolutionary. To rest in someone's presence, to rest in honesty without explanation, to rest knowing you do not have to prove your worth. This kind of rest heals parts of us that achievement never could. And from that healing comes clarity. Clarity about what we will no longer tolerate, clarity about what we deeply value, clarity about the kind of relationships we are willing to invest in. Authenticity sharpens our discernment. It teaches us that depth matters more than breadth, that quality matters more than quantity, and that a few real connections can sustain a lifetime. This is why authentic relationships often feel quieter, slower, and less dramatic than performative ones. There is less chaos, less posturing, less emotional noise. What replaces it is steadiness, reliability, a sense of being held not tightly but securely. And in that security, people flourish. They take risks. They explore new ideas. They grow into fuller versions of themselves. Because when people feel safe, they expand. When they feel judged, they contract. Authentic relationship creates expansion. This expansion is not always visible, but it is transformative. It changes how people move through the world. It softens their defenses. It deepens their empathy. It strengthens their capacity to love without fear. And love without fear is not naive. It is grounded in truth, grounded in boundaries, grounded in mutual respect. It knows that authenticity will not prevent pain, but it will prevent deception. It will not guarantee permanence, but it will guarantee meaning. It will not make relationships effortless, but it will make them honest. And honesty is the soil from which everything real grows. So as we continue this message, let it be a mirror rather than a demand. Let it reflect not where you fall short, but where you are ready. Ready to speak more clearly, ready to listen more openly, ready to show up more fully. Because authenticity is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming more yourself. And the more yourself you are, the more your relationships will align with who you truly are, not who you were taught to be. not who you needed to be to survive, but who you are becoming now. This is the invitation of authentic relationship, an invitation to move from armor to openness, from performance to presence, from isolation to intimacy. And every time you accept that invitation, even imperfectly, you take a step toward a life that is not just connected, but coherent, a life where your inner truth and outer relationships speak the same language. And when that happens, something profound settles in, a sense that you are no longer chasing belonging, you are creating it, and that is where this journey continues. And as we move toward the heart of this message, we must confront one final reality. Authentic relationship begins with a decision long before it becomes a feeling. It begins the moment you decide that truth matters more than image, that connection matters more than control, and that love is something you practice, not something you perform. This decision reshapes how you enter rooms, how you listen to silence, how you respond when things do not go your way. Because authenticity is not situational, it is directional. It sets the direction of your life. It determines whether your relationships move toward depth or drift toward distance. It shapes whether you live divided oneself for the world, another in private or integrated, where who you are is consistent across contexts. And integration is freedom, when you no longer have to remember who you pretended to be, when your words match your inner truth, when your relationships do not require masks to survive. That freedom does not make life easier, but it makes it lighter, because the energy once spent on self-protection can now be spent on connection, creation, and care. This is why authentic relationships are so rare and so powerful. They require two people who are willing to choose honesty over ego, humility over defensiveness, and presence over power. They require patience when progress is slow and grace when mistakes are made. They require the courage to say, I was wrong, and the maturity to say, I am listening. And when those qualities meet, something extraordinary happens. Relationships stop being places where wounds are hidden and become places where wounds are healed. Healing does not come from perfection. It comes from being met again and again in our truth. And this healing does not stay contained within the relationship. It spills outward. People who are authentically connected become less reactive, less fearful, less consumed by validation. They begin to live from security rather than scarcity, and secure people change environments. They lead without intimidation. They love without possession. They disagree without contempt. They become anchors in unstable times. This is why authentic relationship is not a private luxury. It is a public necessity. In families, it shapes emotional health. In workplaces, it shapes trust and collaboration. In communities, it shapes resilience. In societies, it shapes whether difference becomes dialogue or division. The absence of authenticity breeds suspicion. The presence of authenticity builds cohesion. And cohesion is what allows people to face challenges together rather than turning against one another. So when you choose authenticity in your relationships, you are choosing to be part of the solution, even when it costs you something personally, even when it requires you to be misunderstood before you are understood, even when it asks you to lead with truth in spaces that reward performance. That choice is never wasted, because authenticity has a compounding effect. One honest relationship makes the next one easier. One brave conversation strengthens your capacity for the next. Over time, authenticity becomes less of a risk and more of a way of being. And when that happens, relationships stop feeling fragile. They stop feeling transactional. They stop feeling conditional. They start feeling real. And real relationships sustain us when everything else fails. When success fades, when certainty collapses, when identity is shaken, it is real connection, earned through honesty, that remains. So let this be the moment you stop waiting for the right time to be authentic. There will always be reasons to delay. There will always be fears to justify silence. But life does not wait for perfect conditions, and neither does truth. Begin where you are, with the relationship in front of you, with the conversation you have been avoiding, with the honesty you have been rehearsing in your mind but not yet spoken. Speak it with care, listen with humility, stay present with courage. Because the profound stakes in authentic relationship are not about being admired, they are about being aligned, not about being flawless, but about being faithful to what is real. And when you live that way, something remarkable becomes possible. Your relationships stop being places where you hide and start being places where you become braver, where you become kinder, where you become more fully yourself. And that ultimately is the gift of authentic relationship, not that it guarantees happiness, but that it makes a life of truth, depth, and meaning possible. And this is where we continue. And what remains to be said is perhaps the most important part. Authentic relationship is not something we arrive at once and for all. It is something we return to again and again and again. Every new season of life asks us to renegotiate truth. Every change asks us to update our honesty. Every growth moment demands that we reveal who we are becoming, not just who we have been. This is where many relationships struggle, not because love is gone, but because authenticity was frozen in the past. People evolve, but the relationship does not. Expectations stay static while identities shift. And without renewed honesty, distance grows quietly. So authenticity must be living, not historical. It must ask, who are you now? It must allow the answer to change. It must make room for becoming. Authentic relationships are spacious. They do not trap people in former versions of themselves. They understand that loyalty is not about sameness. It is about commitment to truth as it unfolds. This requires emotional bravery. It takes bravery to say, I'm not the same person I was. It takes bravery to say, something in me has changed. It takes bravery to say, I need something different now. But without that bravery, relationships become museums of who we used to be, beautiful, perhaps, but no longer alive. Authenticity keeps relationships breathing, and breathing relationships can hold tension without suffocating. They can hold uncertainty without collapsing. They can hold difference without turning it into division. This is especially vital in a time when certainty is prized and complexity is avoided. Authentic relationships do not demand certainty. They demand sincerity. They allow people to say, I don't know yet, without fear of rejection. They make room for learning, unlearning, and growth. And in doing so, they become places of refuge, not escape, but refuge. A place where the nervous system can rest, a place where defenses can lower, a place where the self does not have to be edited for acceptance. That kind of safety cannot be faked. It is earned through consistency, humility, and mutual care, which brings us to accountability. Authenticity is not just about expression, it is about responsibility. When we are real with others, we also become accountable to the impact of our reality. Authentic relationships invite feedback. They allow correction. They understand that being seen includes being challenged, and challenge, when rooted in care, is a form of love. It says, I see your potential, and I won't abandon you to patterns that harm you. It says, our relationship matters enough to tell the truth. This is how authenticity deepens trust rather than eroding it, because trust grows when people know that honesty is not used as leverage, but as support. That truth is not a threat, but a shared value. And when truth becomes shared, relationships stop being power struggles and start being partnerships. Partnerships in growth, partnerships in healing, partnerships in becoming more human together. This is the quiet power of authentic relationship. It does not dominate. It does not impress. It transforms. It transforms how we see ourselves, less as performers, more as participants. It transforms how we see others, less as obstacles, more as mirrors. It transforms how we see conflict, not as danger, but as data. And when conflict is handled authentically, it becomes a teacher rather than a destroyer. So do not fear the moments that test your relationships. Fear the moments you choose avoidance instead of honesty, silence instead of clarity, comfort instead of connection, because those are the moments where relationships begin to hollow out. Authenticity, even when imperfect, keeps relationships full of truth, full of presence, full of life. And if you ever doubt whether it is worth it, remember this: at the end of life, people rarely regret being too honest. They regret the conversations they never had, the truths they never spoke, the parts of themselves they never shared. They regret living unseen. Authentic relationship offers us a different ending, one marked not by perfection, but by presence, not by ease, but by meaning, not by applause, but by belonging. And so, as this message continues to unfold, let it land not as pressure, but as permission. Permission to be real. Permission to slow down. Permission to choose depth in a world obsessed with speed. Because every authentic relationship, no matter how small, pushes back against isolation. Every honest conversation weakens the culture of pretense. Every moment of presence restores a piece of our shared humanity. And that is why the stakes are so profound. Because in choosing authentic relationship, we are not just improving our personal lives, we are participating in the kind of world we want to live in. A world where truth is not punished, vulnerability is not mocked, and connection is not conditional. A world where people are allowed to be human. And that is a world worth building, one honest relationship at a time. And from this point forward, the responsibility becomes personal. Because once you understand the stakes, you can no longer pretend that neutrality is harmless. You can no longer tell yourself that silence is kindness or that avoidance is peace. Authentic relationship calls us out of passivity and into participation. It asks us to become intentional about how we show up, not only when things are easy, but especially when they are difficult. This is where authenticity matures into commitment. Commitment to listen when your instinct is to defend. Commitment to stay curious when your instinct is to judge. Commitment to repair when your instinct is to withdraw. Authentic relationships are not sustained by feelings alone. They are sustained by values. Feelings fluctuate. Values anchor. And when honesty, respect, and empathy become non-negotiable values, relationships gain a foundation that can withstand stress, time, and change. But let us be clear, authenticity does not mean cruelty dressed as honesty. Truth without compassion becomes a weapon. Authentic relationship requires emotional intelligence, the ability to tell the truth in ways that build rather than break, to speak with clarity while holding care, to remember that being right is never more important than being humane. This is why authentic relationships refine us. They teach us patience. They teach us humility. They teach us how to disagree without dehumanizing. They teach us that love is not proven by intensity, but by consistency, that trust is not built by grand gestures, but by small, repeated acts of reliability. That presence, real presence, is one of the most powerful forms of love we can offer. And in a world driven by speed, noise, and distraction, presence itself becomes radical. To sit with someone without reaching for your phone, to hear pain without trying to fix it immediately, to allow silence without rushing to fill it. These moments may look ordinary, but they are sacred. They are the moments where people feel safe enough to be real. And safety is the soil where authenticity grows. Now consider what happens when authenticity is modeled, when leaders lead with truth instead of image, when parents relate with honesty instead of fear, when friends choose transparency over gossip. Authenticity creates permission. It tells others you don't have to hide here. And when that permission spreads, relationships stop being transactional and start becoming transformational. This is how trust scales. This is how communities strengthen. This is how humanity remembers itself. But none of this happens accidentally. Authentic relationship is built through daily practice, through checking your intentions before you speak, through asking yourself whether your words are meant to connect or to protect your ego, through recognizing when fear is driving your behavior and choosing courage. Anyway, courage does not mean you are unafraid. It means you value connection more than comfort. And comfort, while seductive, is often the enemy of depth. Comfort keeps conversations shallow. Comfort avoids tension. Comfort maintains the status quo. Authenticity, by contrast, disrupts, but it disrupts in service of growth. Growth is rarely neat. It is often uncomfortable, but it is always alive. So when you find yourself at the edge of a difficult conversation, at the threshold of honesty, at the moment where truth feels heavy, pause and remember what is at stake. Remember that every relationship is either moving toward greater truth or drifting toward distance. There is no standing still. And remember this, people do not leave relationships because of too much honesty. They leave because of too much unspoken truth. What is not said does not disappear. It waits. It shapes behavior. It erodes trust quietly. Authenticity interrupts that erosion. It brings things into the light where they can be understood, healed, or released. And yes, sometimes authenticity leads to endings, but even then, it offers clarity instead of confusion, dignity instead of resentment, and peace instead of prolonged pretending. Endings rooted in truth are not failures. They are completions, because the goal of authentic relationship is not permanence at any cost. It is integrity at every stage. And when integrity guides connection, relationships, whether they last a season or a lifetime, leave us stronger, wiser, and more whole than they found us. So as this message continues, let it settle into you not as inspiration alone, but as invitation. An invitation to speak more honestly, to listen more deeply, to show up more fully, to risk being seen not because it guarantees acceptance, but because it guarantees alignment with who you truly are. And alignment, inner and relational, is the foundation of a life well lived. The profound stakes in authentic relationship are ultimately the stakes of our humanity, because to relate authentically is to affirm that people are not objects to manage, roles to perform, or threats to avoid, but complex, fragile, powerful beings worthy of truth and care. And when we choose authenticity again and again, even when it is hard, we participate in something larger than ourselves, the restoration of trust, the deepening of connection, and the quiet revolution of honesty in a world that desperately needs it. And there is still more to say. To be honest with someone is not to harm them, it is to honor them. It says, you matter enough for me to be real with you. It says, our connection is strong enough to hold the truth. And when both people carry that responsibility, the relationship becomes resilient, not fragile. Now imagine the ripple effect of such relationships. Families where children are seen, not managed. Friendships where support does not require performance. Partnerships where love grows deeper with truth, not thinner. Communities where belonging is rooted in presence, not perfection. This is how cultures heal. This is how cycles of silence are broken. This is how people learn that they do not have to choose between being accepted and being authentic. They can have both. But it starts with individuals who are willing to go first. People who are willing to say, this is who I am. People who are willing to listen without defense. People who are willing to stay when it would be easier to leave. These are the people who redefine what relationship means. They understand that authenticity is not weakness. It is strength under discipline. It is the strength to remain open in a world that teaches us to armor up. And yes, you will be misunderstood at times. You will be disappointed. You will encounter moments where honesty feels costly. But even then, authenticity preserves something essential, your integrity. You may lose proximity, but you gain alignment. You may lose approval, but you gain peace. And peace, the kind that comes from living truthfully, is not something comfort can replace. So as you continue forward, Let authenticity be your standard, not your strategy. Let it shape how you speak, how you listen, how you commit, and how you repair. Let it guide not only your relationships with others, but your relationship with yourself, because self-betrayal is the root of relational breakdown. When you are authentic with yourself, you stop asking, how do I need to be loved? And start asking, who do I need to be whole? And from that wholeness, relationships stop being about filling voids and start being about sharing fullness. This is the deeper stake we rarely talk about. Authentic relationships do not just connect us to others, they reconnect us to ourselves. They remind us that we are allowed to exist without explanation, to speak without shrinking, to love without losing ourselves. And when we live from that place, our relationships become reflections of truth rather than negotiations of fear. So do not rush authenticity, but do not postpone it either. Let it unfold with intention, humility, and courage. Let it be imperfect but sincere, because every time you choose truth over avoidance, presence over performance, and courage over comfort, you are investing in something that will outlast trends, platforms, and appearances. You are investing in human connection, and that is why the profound stakes in authentic relationship are not abstract or distant. They are immediate, personal, and enduring. They shape how we love, how we lead, how we heal, and how we leave our mark on the world. And the question that remains is not whether authenticity will cost you something. It will, but whether you are willing to pay the price of truth to gain the depth of connection that makes life not just survivable, but truly worth living. And we will continue from here. And this is why when we talk about the profound stakes in authentic relationship, we are not talking about theory. We are talking about life itself, about the quiet decisions we make every day to either lean in or pull back, to speak truth or remain silent, to choose courage over comfort. Because in the end, the depth of our relationships will always determine the depth of our lives. And the question we must all eventually answer is whether we are willing to risk being real in order to experience what is real, or whether we will continue to protect ourselves from pain at the cost of connection. Growth and the kind of human bond that has the power to heal, transform, and remind us why we were never meant to walk this journey alone. Because the moment we stop pretending and start showing up fully is the moment when relationship stops being something we have and becomes something we are. And that is where everything truly begins, where fear gives way to trust, where silence gives way to understanding, and where authenticity no longer feels like a risk, but like a necessity. Because without it, we may survive, but we will never truly live. And with it, even the hardest conversations become bridges instead of walls, and even the deepest wounds become opportunities for healing, growth, and the kind of connection that does not break under pressure, but deepens through it, reminding us again and again that the greatest risk is not being hurt, but never being known, never being loved for who we really are, and never allowing ourselves to step fully into the relationships that could change everything. Because the profound stakes in authentic relationship are nothing less than the difference between a life merely endured and a life deeply, courageously, and meaningfully lived. And that is why we must begin by choosing today, in this moment, to be honest, to be present, and to be willing to take the risk. Because the future of our relationships, our communities, and our very sense of humanity depends on whether we are brave enough to continue, because continuation is not automatic. It is a choice we must make again and again. Authentic relationship does not ask for one brave moment. It asks for a lifetime of brave moments. It asks us to keep showing up after the first disappointment, to keep speaking truth after the first misunderstanding, to keep choosing connection after the first fracture. This is where many people stop, not because they don't value relationships, but because they underestimate the endurance that authenticity requires. Real connection is sustained, not sparked. Anyone can be honest once. Anyone can be vulnerable when emotions are high. But authentic relationships are forged in consistency, in the daily decision to align words with actions, intentions with behavior, and love with responsibility. They are built when apologies are not performative, when listening is not selective, and when growth is mutual. And here is a hard truth we must face. Authenticity will sometimes cost you people. Not everyone can meet you where truth lives. Not everyone benefits from your growth. When you stop pretending, some relationships lose their structure because they were built on convenience, control, or expectation, not mutual truth. And while that loss can feel painful, it is also clarifying because authenticity does not destroy real connection. It reveals what was real and what was not. What remains after truth is what can last. Authentic relationships create spaces where evolution is allowed, where people are not frozen in past versions of themselves, where change is not seen as betrayal but as evidence of life. In such relationships, growth is not threatening. It is celebrated. Differences are not enemies. They are invitations to understanding. This is especially critical in a time when polarization is rewarded and empathy is rushed. Authentic relationship slows us down. It demands nuance. It asks us to hold complexity without reducing people to labels, mistakes, or moments. It teaches us that disagreement does not equal disrespect, and that love does not require uniformity. And in that space where truth and grace coexist, something extraordinary happens. Trust deepens. Trust is not built by perfection. It is built by repair, by returning to the table after conflict, by staying present when discomfort arises, by choosing clarity over avoidance. Authentic relationships do not avoid hard conversations. They dignify them. They understand that what is left unsaid does not disappear. It accumulates, distorts, and eventually divides. So authenticity becomes an act of care. Today, I want to speak to you about something that quietly determines the quality of our lives more than success, more than money, more than recognition. I want to speak to you about authentic relationship and the profound stakes involved when we choose it or when we avoid it. We live in a world overflowing with connection, yet starving for intimacy. We have contacts, followers, likes, and networks, but still, so many of us feel unseen. Why? Because proximity is not presence, and communication is not communion. Authentic relationships demand something deeper, something riskier, truth. Authenticity is not comfort. Authenticity is courage. To be authentic with another human being means allowing yourself to be known. Not the polished version, not the strategic version, not the socially acceptable mask, but the real you, the one with doubts, the one with fears, the one with unresolved questions. And this is where the stakes become profound, because once you are truly seen, rejection hurts more, loss cuts deeper, betrayal wounds more sharply. And so many people choose safety over sincerity. But let me tell you something important. Safety without authenticity is not safety at all. It is slow erosion. When we hide, we shrink. When we perform, we fragment. When we constantly manage perceptions, we quietly abandon ourselves. And every time we do that, we pay a price, not all at once, but gradually. We pay with loneliness in crowded rooms. We pay with relationships that look strong on the outside but feel hollow on the inside. We pay with a persistent ache we cannot name. Authentic relationships, on the other hand, ask everything of us and give everything back. They ask us to listen, not to reply, but to understand. They ask us to speak, not to impress, but to reveal. They ask us to stay present when it would be easier to withdraw. They ask us to forgive when our pride wants distance. And yes, they ask us to risk being hurt. But here is the truth we often avoid. There is no meaningful relationship without vulnerability, and there is no vulnerability without risk. Think about the relationships that have shaped you the most. Not the easiest ones, the real ones. the ones that challenged you, the ones that forced you to grow, the ones where honesty was sometimes uncomfortable but always necessary. Those relationships did not thrive because they were perfect. They thrived because they were real. Authenticity creates trust, and trust creates safety. Not the illusion of safety, but the kind that allows people to grow, to fail, to change, and still belong. Now let's talk about the cost of inauthenticity. When relationships are built on pretense, they demand maintenance. You must remember who you pretended to be. You must protect the image. You must avoid certain truths. Over time, this becomes exhausting, and eventually something breaks, either the relationship or the person inside it. This is why so many relationships end not with explosions, but with silence, not with anger, but with numbness, not because love disappeared, but because honesty never fully arrived. Authentic relationships are not perfect relationships. They include conflict, they include misunderstanding, they include moments of disappointment, but they also include repair, they include growth, they include a shared commitment to truth over ego. And this is where the stakes rise even higher, because authenticity does not just affect who we are close to, it affects who we become. We are shaped by the relationships we keep. When we surround ourselves with people who only know our mask, we never fully develop our character. But when we are in authentic relationships, we are mirrored, honestly. We are challenged lovingly. We are called higher not by pressure, but by belonging. Authentic relationships make us braver, kinder, more grounded. They remind us that we are not alone in our struggles and not superior in our successes. They keep us human in a world that constantly pushes us to perform. And yet, authenticity requires timing, wisdom, and discernment. It does not mean oversharing without boundaries. It does not mean forcing truth where safety has not yet been built. Authenticity is not recklessness. It is responsibility for our words, our presence, and our impact on others. So the question is not, is authenticity worth it? The real question is, what is the cost of living without it? What happens to a life where no one truly knows you? What happens to a partnership where honesty is sacrificed for peace? What happens to a community where appearance matters more than connection? The answer is always the same. Something essential withers. But when authenticity enters a relationship, when two people decide that truth matters more than comfort, that understanding matters more than winning, that connection matters more than control, something powerful happens. Walls come down, healing begins, growth accelerates, and suddenly the relationship becomes not just a source of support, but a source of transformation. This is why authentic relationships are worth the risk. Because while they may cost you illusions, they give you reality. While they may expose you, they also anchor you. While they may challenge you, they ultimately strengthen you. And so I challenge you today, look at your relationships and ask yourself, where am I hiding? Where am I performing? Where am I withholding truth out of fear? Not to judge yourself, but to awaken yourself. Because the moment you choose authenticity, you are choosing depth over surface, meaning over appearance, and growth over stagnation. And although that path is not easy, it is the only path that leads to relationships that endure storms, survive change, and nourish the soul. The stakes are profound because relationships are not accessories to life. They are the substance of it. And how we show up in them determines not only the quality of our connections, but the quality of our character. Authentic relationships ask us to be real in a world that rewards performance, to be honest in a culture that prefers convenience, and to be present when distraction is easier. But those who accept this call discover something rare, a sense of belonging that does not require pretending, a love that does not demand perfection, and a connection that grows stronger precisely because it is built on truth. And when you finally experience that, when you stand in a relationship where you are fully seen and still fully accepted, you realize that every risk was worth it because you were never meant to live unseen, unheard, or unknown. You were meant to be known deeply, to love bravely, and to build relationships that reflect not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are.